So now I need to just go through and do the exact same process of adding texture UVs to the actual bodywork of my asset. So you can see I've just created a UV2, or actually I think I actually had the UV2 applied because I had to go through and make sure my UVs were ordered correctly earlier on. So I'm just going through and I'm just grabbing any faces that I want to be in this UV island. And then when I UV those, then it will just make sure that my texture wraps nicely around this panel. And then those faces on the underside, they can just be on their own UVs because it won't be so noticeable that the texture's not wrapping all the way around quite as nicely. So I'm just going to quickly do a test. So now that I've added that UV2, then I can come and look at the panel and just see how nicely the UVs work there. So you can see that when I look at the asset right now, it's way too clean as well. So at some point what I'll need to do is bake out bake out masks that will allow me to add grime and scratches to this. All I'm doing at the moment is going through, grabbing the panels, making sure that they have UVs that will be set to the same texel density, and we'll just tile my general scratched bodywork material over it. So all I'm doing is going through, setting up my basic UVs. They don't need to be perfect as long as the materials look like they wrap around the assets themselves. And then I'm just making sure that they look decent by using this UV grid. So you can see that the inside at the moment looks good, but those outside faces don't look great. And any kind of warping like I have in some areas, and I need to just get rid of that. So I'll just keep re-UVing until I feel like those faces look good. So sometimes you just need to add these kind of extra edges so that the whole thing unfolds in a little bit neater way. Again, it doesn't matter too much if there's a little bit of warping and things like that, but I do try and make sure that my UVs like this are really quite neat, because things like wood grain and checkerboards and things, you would really notice the warping. So I don't know what kind of textures I might want to apply to this later, so I'll try and ensure that I keep it nice and neat, because if I was to want to add a carbon fiber effect, for example, it wouldn't work very well if my UVs were quite untidy. The other thing I could do is just to make sure that I align these faces correctly. So maybe they would want to be aligned in a certain way that a wood grain would look like it was tiling across it correctly. For this material, it doesn't matter too much just because it's a tiling painted metal, so it works quite well without that. But if I was making something like a piece of wooden furniture, I'd need to make sure that I UV all of this so that there's no distortion in my UVs. But I also need to make sure that it's aligned nicely so that the wood grain looks natural. So if you want to accelerate this video or skip ahead, that's completely fine. All I'm going to do is just continue on through the process of checking all of my bodywork, UVing this out in the same way, making sure that my grid looks neat, and then set my texel density. This is the kind of thing where I really don't want to do UV projection, because UV projection, it becomes very obvious if I have the UV island stopping at edges. So then you'll notice that scratches and small details won't wrap around the edges. And if you want the sort of force normal bevels effect to really look like it's baked, then you need to try and make sure that those scratches and small details also wrap around those bevels so they look like they're well integrated into the design of it. But it's having edges in your textures is a really good way of kind of breaking the immersion on those bevels. But that's exactly why I want 2 UV sets, because the one UV set is designed purely just to bake and just to give me those kind of nice results on normals, AO, scratches, grime, and things like that. And then this second UV set, its whole job is to make sure that textures look like they wrap around my assets nicely. So you can see the UV set becomes really quite crazy to look at. but that's just because all of these pieces are UV'd individually to make sure that they have the nicest results possible for the actual materials. And then they're all overlapping each other and set to the same textile density. So it's going to get pretty hectic, but that's just not a problem. Especially because it's very easy for me to go through, grab an area, and then hide everything else. I'm just isolating areas as I UV. So you can see at the moment that while I UV this, I'm hiding the rest of the asset, doing my UVs, checking that it's correct, and then I'll move on to the next thing. So you can see how if I had sort of a brick texture or something like that, then it would quite easily sort of tile over this whole thing, and you would have that same scale to the bricks because I'm doing this textile density at every step of the way. But you can also see how the bricks would wrap around corners and things like that. If I was doing something as uniform as bricks, I might need to be a little bit neater in my UVs. I might need to make sure that there's no deforming at all. This is one of those things where it may have been a better idea to have set up some of these UVs in the original assets, like the original side booster, so that I didn't have to do it multiple times like this. Because I had those instanced out, I could have set up my UVs for baking and also my UVs for the textures, but that's just, I've made a mistake. But luckily, because this is quite iterative, then I can just do this quite quickly and I know that I'm not causing a huge problem. If I really wanted to, then I could just copy one booster and replace the second booster with the first one. But I know that the UV process doesn't take too long because there's no kind of strict rule to this UV process. I am simply just UVing it so that the materials wrap around. So once I finish this, then I'm just going to go back to my initial UV set, my UV1 for all of the bodywork, and I'm just going to show how I bake an edge mask, a cavity mask, and my AO. And then after that, I'll put together all of my final shaders so that we can see the final drone all finished. So what I'm doing now is I'm looking around the drone to make sure those textures look like they're doing their job and that the UVs are acting correctly. So once I'm happy with this, then I'll move on to baking out those masks that I told you about.